Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon podcast. I'm feeling much better this week, so hopefully I should have a little bit more energy for you than last week. That being said, I still do have a bit of a cough, so rather than try to make my way through an interview with somebody else, I'm going to run another solo episode where I'm going to be talking you through my top 5 tips for someone taking on their first Ironman event. Now, this is also applicable to Ironman 70.3. The distances aren't too dissimilar in the way that you approach them. Of course, the intensity is quite different for many athletes, especially competitive athletes. But essentially, it's tips to help you through training for the longest event you've done to date that's going to be over sort of the 3 hour mark. Now, wasting no time whatsoever, I'm going to jump straight into point number 1, which is slow down. You are training for an Ironman, and as much as you may think to yourself, I'm aiming for 12 hours, I'm aiming for 13, 14 hours, whatever the target you have in your head is, you need to be honest. This is assuming this is your first event, and say, look, I could be out there for 17 hours through maybe no fault of your own. It could be that you have a mechanical on the bike. It could be that you have an issue with your nutrition, which is a bit more in your control, but as we'll touch on in a bit, sometimes these things, they just hit you out of nowhere. There are all sorts of things that could go wrong on the day. You need to prepare yourself for 17 hours of relentless forward motion. And you know what? This needs to be reflected in your training. If I were to ask you to go out and walk for 17 hours non-stop, are you going to go out, are you going to start with a run? I think, you know what? I'll run the first few hours, that'll feel good. No, you're going to set out, are you going to go, right, I need to pace this. And that needs to be the same approach with your training. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to do any intensity in your training. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Intensity is important. We need to have it at least once, maybe twice a week, depending on your weekly volume for an Ironman athlete. I wouldn't really suggest many age groupers go for more than 3 high intensity sessions a week. But the rest of your training should be in that sort of that zone 2 easy space. Now you may wonder, what is all this zone 2 training you hear about? What's it referring to? And how does it benefit me? Well, if we break down our training intensity, we can use what's called a zone system, where zone 1 is for recovery, zone 2 is for long, steady efforts, zone 3 is for tempo, so sort of towards that sort of 70.3 race intensity for some people. Zone 4 is threshold, so we can hold for roughly 30 to 60 minutes. And zone 5 is really high intensity over threshold work. Now, if you go out and you Google how to find my zone 2, you'll find lots of articles that will help you. But I give you a quick tip. It is not 220 minus your age. That's a gross oversimplification. The way you want to calculate your zone 2 is by either conducting an FTP test, a speed test with running or swimming, or by analysing it by looking at your heart rate data for a big effort of either 20 or 60 minutes. You can find methods that will help you find your zone 2. But what is it that's so magical, in inverted commas? What is it that happens at this intensity that means that training here is very trendy? Well, the reason that we train around the zone 2 mark is that our body is quite simply using the aerobic system as its primary source of energy. Now, the closer you get to your threshold, the more lactate your body starts to create, which in turn becomes lactic acid, which is responsible for that really heavy, painful leg feeling that you will get towards the end of, say, sort of a 5k or a 10k, where your legs are filling up with lactic acid. It's painful, and it can sit around for a few hours afterwards as well. Now, where there is lactic acid, there is also lactate, which is a waste product of the processes which I'm not going to bore you with. However, what the body does is when it is working at this higher intensity, it starts to recycle some of this lactate and to use it as fuel. And if your body is using lactate as fuel, it's not using oxygen as fuel. So if you're out and you are running in zone 3 or zone 4, or cycling or swimming in that zone, then you can find that, yeah, it will feel good. You will get a good workout, in inverted commas. It will be hard. And you will feel very accomplished, very tired by the end of it. You will find yourself sort of setting personal bests, getting faster. All these good things. And as a result, a lot of people find it very difficult to slow down. Yeah, but this feels good. This is what I need. However, we are looking at an Ironman. Even the fastest athletes in the world are finishing around the 8-9 hour mark. Okay? This is a heavily aerobic activity. Nobody is really coming close to developing much in the way of lactic acid, getting towards that threshold point at any point during the race, okay? The biggest limiter for most people, what's holding them back from being faster, is their ability to process oxygen. So, how the body works when it is trying to generate energy for endurance exercise is it starts with inhaling oxygen into your lungs. That oxygen then gets passed through your lungs into your bloodstream. The heart then pumps this oxygenated blood around the body where it will reach our muscles. And the muscles take the oxygen and go, thank you very much. And it uses oxygen to create something called adenosine triphosphate, otherwise known as ATP, which essentially allows the muscle to contract and allows for movement. Now, if you imagine somebody who on January the 1st had decided they're going to take up running to lose weight, and they come out their front door, they turn left, they start running down the street, and before they even get to the end of their road, they're out of breath. And the reason for this is that the body has been unable to process oxygen fast enough to be able to meet the demands of the body. So, if you think his lungs may well not be very big, not very developed, his heart is probably going to be going like an absolute jackhammer, trying to get that oxygen to the muscle as fast as it can, and it all just comes to a crux where the body essentially turns around and goes, I can't keep doing this, and it forces the athlete to stop. The good news is that this is eminently trainable. It is very easy to train your body to be able to work at a higher intensity for prolonged periods without fatigue. Most of you would have absolutely no problem running down to the end of your road, even if you are, relatively new to the sport. And the reason is because you have the aerobic fitness to be able to facilitate that. Your heart and your lungs can keep up with the demand. They can keep the oxygen flowing to the muscles for long enough for you to complete a short run. However, running to the end of our road, running for an hour around the block isn't going to cut it for Ironman training, okay? We need to run a marathon after a 3.8 kilometre swim and a 180 kilometre bike. So we need to do a lot of this training to make our lungs and our heart as strong, as efficient as possible. Now, the downside to this is that it takes weeks, months, and years to develop your aerobic system. Nobody comes to Ironman from doing a completely unrelated sport and starts winning within the first 2 to 3 years. Okay? It just doesn't happen because it takes so long to build this aerobic system, to build this really strong foundation. Okay? And it is going to take a long time for you to build this up, and you're not going to see immediate results. However, you need to trust the process. You need to trust that nearly every sports scientist on the planet is united behind the need for this low intensity training for endurance events like Ironman. So people may ask, well, how much zone 2 is enough? Lots of people are telling them they need to do this training. Well, how much is enough? Well, there is, I don't subscribe to it, but people talk about the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your training should be sort of zone 2, and 20% should be above this at higher intensities. And this is something that most people agree on. And again, this is the number of sessions in a week, in a month, in a year, as opposed to minutes spent within that zone. If you look at most high intensity workouts, you're not going to be spending much more than 50% of your time working at high intensities once you include recoveries, warm ups, cool downs, all of that. So it may well be that actually 10% of the time that you spend is above zone 2. And I have to say, an athlete can never be too aerobically fit. We touched on this in last week's episode, looking at sprint triathlons. You can never have an athlete who, unless they are at risk of overtraining, who can have too much aerobic fitness. Obviously you can do too much in too short a time, but if we are looking at several weeks, months, and years of this training, there isn't really a point in which you can say, oh, you know what, we are aerobically fit enough. You can always do more. Now, there will come an inflection point where you have somebody, like there are a few clients that I've worked with for 3, 4, 5 years, and you get to the point where we've done so much of this aerobic training, they come back to me and say, look, my lungs are great, I can keep going through all of these sessions. The problem comes when I try to go above this, when I try to run that sort of that half marathon pace, I come in and go, okay, right, then it is time for us to come in and it is time to tweak this. But for most people, it takes several years to get to that point where aerobic fitness is no longer their primary limiter. And let's be honest, while it can be a hard sell for those doing shorter distances, for Ironman athletes, zone 2 is probably going to be your race pace. It might even be that zone 1 is your race pace. Now, I don't personally like prescribing zone 1 training. I kind of feel that if you have to give somebody a zone 1 session, would they just be better off sat on the sofa with their feet up, recovery from their other sessions? That's my personal belief. But again, if you're using zone 1 sessions and they really work for you, I'm not going to stop you. Moving on to point number 2 here. Nail your nutrition. Your nutrition is not something you can blag your way through on race day. It's not something you can, I'll just grab what's in the aid stations, okay? You need to have a really, really solid plan for your nutrition going to race day. Otherwise, you will count your mistake in hours. If you are to wake up on a Sunday morning and you were to go about your day as normal, think about how much you'd eat during that day. Now, as you may know, if you've been listening to some of my other podcasts, most people would need somewhere around between sort of 2,500, maybe 3,000 calories a day just to survive before we even start looking at training. Now, imagine how much you'll have to eat if you are taking on the challenge of a lifetime, if you're taking on an Ironman at the same time. You are going to be looking at over 10,000 calories that you're going to need to ingest to keep your body moving. This isn't something you can just, I'll have a gel when I get hungry. I will grab whatever's at the aid station, okay? You need a plan. You need to practice this plan in your training, okay? I'm recording this in March. If you're listening to this in the Northern Hemisphere, the races don't really start for another 2 months. You have no excuse not to get your nutrition dialed ahead of race day. So what can race nutrition look like? Well, realistically, it can look like whatever the hell you want it to look like. You don't have to use jars. You don't have to use energy drinks. You don't have to use energy bars. You can eat whatever it is that you please. If on the bike you prefer to have savoury, eat savoury. Listening to your body is one of the key things that you need to do. It's a key lesson to learn. If you are not trying to be competitive at all, if you just want to get round, if you want to enjoy the day and you want to eat whatever you want, then eat whatever it is that you want. However, if you are looking to put in what I call a sort of a half respectable time, so if we're looking to come in somewhere around sort of the 12, 14 hour mark, okay, at this point, we probably need to start thinking about our sort of using sports nutrition products. So these are concentrated sources of carbohydrates that our body will use to very quickly create energy for ourselves to use. If we are not eating enough, if we're not taking enough calories, if we're not taking enough carbohydrate, because our body cannot digest, it cannot break down fat fast enough for us to be able to use it in endurance exercise, same with protein, you need carbohydrate to fuel your efforts. If you are not taking on enough carbohydrate, your body is simply going to come to a stop. It's going to come to a grinding halt and it's going to say, I do not want to. I cannot keep pushing. My survival instincts are kicking in. So what do these options look like? Now, the first one is the ubiquitous energy gel. Some athletes absolutely swear by energy gels, and they have a stomach made of iron, and it means that they can take 2-3 energy gels an hour, and they can just keep going. I, however, I'm not the complete opposite end of this spectrum, but I'm not far off either. I can stomach energy gels, some people just straight up can't. If you've had some bad experiences with gels, I suggest you try other brands. Ones that might be less sweet, have a different texture. You know, there are a lot of brands, there are a lot of textures, a lot of tastes out there. There is a lot of variation to energy gels. But the benefit to an energy gel is how easy it is to digest and how quickly that carbohydrate gets into our digestive system and gets to our muscles. If I were to take on something that was salty, carbohydrate, savoury, maybe has some protein in it, I know some people swear by pork pies. If I'm to eat a pork pie on the bike, I could be waiting for sort of 20-25 minutes. Again, just plucking these numbers out of the air, it's not scientific. Around that kind of amount of time before I really start to feel the benefits in my legs. Whereas if I take on a gel, it could be within sort of 5 to 10 minutes where my legs really come alive again. And my body's able to digest the sugar and get it to my leg. And yes, gels, as most sports nutrition products are based, are all sort of on sugar. There is nothing better for fast release energy than sugar. And I know it can be a bit of a dirty word in many cases. But really, I need you to think, what is the best for the situation that I'm in right now? Am I sat on the sofa watching Game of Thrones? Or am I out participating in endurance exercise? Okay? You need to look at the context of the situation you're in and go, actually, is sugar the most appropriate sort of food for me right now? And chances are, yes, it is. So gels aren't really much more than sort of a concentrated, easily digestible sugar, but with some other technology in there to make them a bit more palatable, to get to the bloodstream differently. There's all this marketing gumph that you can find. But if you do decide to go down the gel route, try different brands, try different flavours, try and find something where actually, ideally, more than one flavour or brand so you can rotate them during the race. Try and find what works for you. Next up is our energy bar. Now, these are a very sort of classic form of sports nutrition that predate the energy gel, where it is essentially an oat bar that's sort of bound together with sort of a sugary sort of solution, for want of a better term, really. So you have, what's nice about the energy bars is you have a mixture between your sugar, your high GI carbs, as well as the oats, which give you those low GI carbs. So the binding agent that they use, that will give you a nice little sort of perk up. There is research that suggests that your mouth, as soon as you start to ingest some sugar and carbohydrate, will start to sort of gain some benefit from that immediately. So you get that little short-term tick up from the binding agent, and then when that starts to run out, hopefully the oats will have started digesting, and you will start to get that lower GI, longer-term energy coming from the oats. The downside with bars is that if you find yourself in a real hole, I've had it before where without very much warning, suddenly, boom, the lights go out. And I find myself crashing and burning from an energy perspective. So I really, if I would take an energy bar in that situation, it would take some time before I felt better. Whereas if I were to have a gel, I feel within sort of 5-10 minutes, I'd be start to feel a little bit of an effect. Now, whereas a gel may only keep you going for about sort of 20 minutes before you start to feel that crash again, an energy bar might keep you going a little bit longer due to the low GI nature. But again, these are things you need to find out in your training rather than something that you just sort of fumble your way through on race day. Next up, we have carb drinks, which are not overly dissimilar from the other products in that they are based on sugar. And they will often have in them as well some electrolytes, so some sodium, potassium, sometimes calcium, the classic electrolyte mix that you hear people talking about. But for all intents and purposes, they turn your water into being this very sugary beverage that you can drink at intervals as you're riding. Now, the nice thing, for my money at least, about energy drinks is that, sorry, by which I mean carbohydrate drinks. If I sometimes call them energy drinks, they might be called energy mix. I'm not trying to say you should bring a can of Monster or Red Bull with you on the circuit. There can be a place for some Red Bull sometimes at the end of an event. Some people really go for that. It's never once appealed to me during a longer distance triathlon, but there we are. So, yeah, I would definitely say take these drinks with you if you practice with them, but be mindful that there will come a time when you will just want the ability to drink something that isn't this sugary mix. Many triathlons are held in warm or even hot environments, and if you are looking at, right, I need to take on 750 millilitres an hour to be able to maintain my levels of hydration, you cannot have that all from energy drink, because you are going to find yourself at a point within probably 2-3 hours where you're going to go, no, I just want water, I don't want any more of this sugary mix. However, they are a great option for being easily digestible. You can carry them easily within your bottle cages. And if somebody is competing over an Ironman distance, it's not that uncommon for them to have maybe one bottle on the frame, one bottle between the aero bars, maybe even 2 bottles behind them on a rear-mounted cage system. You can carry quite a lot of fluid with you, and within that, you can carry with you maybe sort of a litre and a half of this energy drink mix, which is a great option because as you can sip it as you go along, you don't need to take it in one big hit like you would sort of an energy gel or an energy bar. You can take half a gel or half an energy bar, but it does tend to get quite messy in your pockets. The amount of times that I've thought, I don't think I can stomach a whole gel, but I know that I need to keep on top of my fueling, so I take on half a gel and I put it in the pocket of my race suit or my jersey if I'm just out training, and the amount of times that it makes an almighty mess, well, it's every time. So having these carb drinks to sip on, as and when you feel that you maybe need a bit of a top up, is actually a really good idea. Now, alongside the gels, bars and drink mix, various companies have come up with lots of other different kind of chews and other inventions they've come up with, which are ways that they have found of delivering carbohydrate to athletes. And I encourage people to try these, okay? Especially if you're struggling with other sports nutrition products. Now, this also begs a question of how much carbohydrate should we be taking on? Now, this is a personal question. Some people's digestive systems are just more capable of digesting carbohydrate. I find very anecdotally, athletes who are slightly larger generally can take on more carbohydrate per hour than somebody who is lighter. But again, don't let that dictate how you feel too much about this. You do need to try out for yourself. Now, the minimum that I recommend athletes take, well, the minimum that most athletes need, is 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. If you're having much less than this, you're probably setting yourself up for disaster. You may be okay for the first 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 hours. But an Ironman is going to take you longer than 6 hours. I don't care who you are. And if you are progressively getting hungrier because you're not giving your body enough fuel, it is going to push back and it is going to say, no, I need more if I'm going to continue. So 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour is the bare minimum that somebody needs. Now, if you can eat more carbohydrates while training than 60 grams an hour, if you go up to 70, 80, maybe even 90 or above, I encourage you to. There is research out there that suggests there's a correlation between the amount of carbohydrate that somebody can consume and their race day performance. At this point, I wanted to take a step back and I wanted to have a look at, we were talking about people who may be taking the Ironman less seriously and maybe wanting to eat a greater variety of foods out there rather than relying on energy products. Now, I would say that for these people, you definitely want to be looking at a special needs bag. In fact, I say that every athlete should consider signing up for one of the special needs bags that Ironman provide. Again, I'm talking about Ironman events here, who are the official events, inverted commas, the race organizer, the company Ironman, who provide special needs bags. Now, these are bags that are available on the race course for you to sort of collect once per lap on the bike. Now, if you have either a 2-lap course or a 3-lap course, that will tell you how many chances you have to collect your bag. But I recommend that everyone uses these. Now, you can, generally speaking, sort of have one of two approaches, or a hybrid approach with these. Either you can fill it up with energy products that you need. If you do your calculations and you think, I'm going to take 4 bottles with me, I'm going to have 2 bottles of carb mix, 1 concentrated electrolyte solution, and a clear bottle of water, but I want to use my nutrition, not the nutrition on the course, then you're going to want to be looking at placing these extra products in your bag. So you go, okay, well, I put another 2 bottles of carb mix in, I put another bottle of concentrated electrolyte mix, but you know what, I can probably get my clear water, my pure water, from the aid station, because obviously there's no products involved in that, so maybe I don't need to place that in my special needs bag. But it's incredibly difficult for most people to get enough fuel on their bike frame to see them through an entire Ironman bike leg. And if you don't want to use the nutrition provided on the course, then filling up a special needs bag with the stuff that works for you is a really good way to go about it. Now, the other use for a special needs bag is to stick in there whatever it is that you know that you really crave deep into a long cycle. Now, you're hopefully going to be putting in some really big, really long bike rides, and you will learn an awful lot about fueling during these rides. But you'll also find yourself, you're going to make some mistakes with your nutrition, and you're going to get to some points where you're absolutely starving on the bike. Think, all I can think about is pizza, maybe. And that's your body saying, oh, you know what? That is what I really need. That is what my body is really asking for right now, a pizza. And you know what? You have to honour that. And so maybe in your special needs bag, you could place a cold piece of pizza. You can put in your bag whatever it is that you want, that you know is going to scratch that itch that you get when you become really hungry on the bike. I personally think that a bit of the best of both worlds is required here. I think you should fill up your special needs bag with some replacement of your favourite energy products if you're using any at all, but I do also think you should stick some food in there that you know is going to help settle your stomach, that is going to make you sort of feel really good about yourself, just in case your nutrition plan hasn't worked out for whatever reason. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour around race nutrition. It's a huge subject. But you really do need to make sure that you nail your nutrition on race day. Now, as I alluded to earlier, and just now actually, sometimes for no discernible reason, your plan just doesn't work. You have a lot of elite athletes who work with very qualified nutritionists and dietitians to come up with the best plan. They practice, but on race day, for whatever reason, they find themselves walking with cramps, having to make stops in the toilet, or if you're Christian Blumenfeld, you might even find yourself projectile vomiting in the aero position whilst riding along. Um, you just have to go into it with your eyes open and do all the work that you can to prepare for it. Practice your race nutrition in your training and just do everything that you can to have a plan ahead of race day. Don't just go into race day and try to figure it out. Actually, another word of warning, if you are planning to use the nutrition that's provided on race day by the race organizer, please practice with it, just in case it makes you feel really unwell, or it doesn't digest, it doesn't sit well on your stomach. You don't want to find out on race day that you can't stomach the gels that they are providing. Moving on to tip number 3, which is including strength and conditioning in your training. Now, this can be a bit of a hard sell to certain athletes. Maybe not so much for those training for their first Ironman. However, as we all know, the most important thing in triathlon training is consistency. It's turning up day after day, week after week, month after month. And the arch enemy of consistency is injury. Anyone who has ever had a proper, full-blown injury will know just how miserable it is, just how difficult and mentally challenging it can be to go from training with most of your free time to having to sit there and being unable to do anything, especially if the training was a real sort of crutch for you, for your mental health, for your general well-being. Finding yourself sidelined is an absolute nightmare, and for a lot of people, they will then have to go through a rehab process, which is probably going to involve strength and conditioning work. All of this could be avoided if they had included some strength and conditioning in their training program. Should clarify before going any further, actually, I'm referring here to overuse injuries, where somebody has pushed a muscle or a tendon or another part of their body harder than it is able to sort of keep up with, and it has retaliated with some sort of rupture or tendonitis or sprain, something like that. If you fall off your bike and you bang yourself up, then no amount of strength and conditioning is going to be able to help prevent that. However, most of the injuries that keep athletes on the sidelines for a prolonged period of time are overuse injuries, most commonly running injuries. There are some people in the field who talk about, well, they're not overuse injuries, they're underprepared injuries. You know, you would have avoided that injury if you had been better prepared. I guess there is some truth in that. However, an athlete can do absolutely everything right. They can be working with some of the top strength and conditioning coaches in the world, and they can still get injured because the human body is incredibly complex. It is so difficult for us to nail things down and to be able to go, oh yes, that is exactly the reason why you might get injured there. So we're going to give this exercise here. There are generalizations that I will make with athletes, such as, focusing on the posterior chain, hip mobility. The posterior chain being your glutes and your hamstrings and your calves, all the muscles on the backs of your legs. We can focus on the general problem areas that triathletes suffer with, but I don't have the time to do a movement assessment with every athlete every week to see how they're moving. However, it is just really important that we do something to help target areas which either tend to be quite tight, underused muscles, such as our glutes, because a lot of us spend far too much time sitting down. Our glutes become really lazy, they don't contribute the way they should, And I would wager that about 50% of running injuries, people going to the physio, is going to be to do with some kind of underactivity from their glutes. But it's not just strengthening muscles, which is the reason we go to the gym. We are also including mobility work, okay? So we are looking at the range of motion within a joint, not just looking at the ability of ourselves to touch our toes. We're looking at the range of motion in our hips, in our shoulders, in our ankles, in all of these joints. But if we have restricted mobility, that's going to affect our biomechanics, which could in turn result in a higher risk of injury. An ongoing frustration of mine is athletes that I work with where they will go to the gym and they'll look at the mobility work that I've set and they'll go, oh, that's difficult, or oh, that's time consuming. And they'll go, oh, I'm just going to do the bench press. Oh, I'm just going to do the squats instead. And, yes, the strengthening aspect of our S&C, it is important, but the mobility aspect is just as, if not more important. And the exercises, the sort of the 90-90, the overhead squat, these exercises which place us in deliberately uncomfortable positions, if you find it difficult, that's because you need to improve on your ability in those areas. It's not a chance for you to go, you know what, I find that one difficult, I'm going to sack it off and do something I enjoy more. We really are trying to reduce the risk of injury by improving our mobility. And if I had to make a choice between an athlete only ever doing strength work or only ever doing mobility work, I might choose mobility actually. It is so fundamental to how we move, and it's not something you can ignore. Now, strength training doesn't have to mean getting an expensive gym membership. It can be done from home with little to no weight. If somebody's just starting out, then doing bodyweight exercises may be all they really need to challenge themselves. And then maybe they can get themselves a cheap set of dumbbells and sort of continue improving on that until maybe they feel confident enough to go to the gym. Another reason that we really do need to look at including this in our training is if you think about planes of motion that a human being can move through. There is moving back and forth. Okay, so me walking forwards or walking backwards. In a triathlon, we do a lot of that. What we don't do a lot of is moving from side to side or moving through a twisting plane. And, well, I don't think we really do any of that, do we? Unless things go really wrong. But the issue is that if we are, in all of our training, if we're only ever moving forwards and backwards, if we're not including any movement in any other plane, that is going to result in muscular imbalances over time. Remember, the human body is designed for prolonged endurance activity. It's one of the things that set us apart on the evolutionary sort of race, as it were. But we were also designed to move in lots of different ways, do lots of other tasks. And if we are simply always going backwards and forwards, there are loads of muscles in our body which just aren't getting used. Picking out an example, lots of you will be familiar with the glute medius, which is a smallish muscle that's in our glutes that controls how our leg is. It's called abduction and adduction, but essentially if we were standing still and we lift, sort of pull our leg outside of our body, so if I were to stand on my left leg and move my right leg to the right, that would be called abduction, and my leg would be moving away from my body. The glute medius controls this action, and lots of athletes will find themselves injured with IT band problems as well as other issues from having a weak glute medius, because guess what? It never gets engaged. You never walk from side to side, which results in this weakness, which then manifests itself as being knee pain. And there is also performance benefits to strength and conditioning as well, if we're including plyometrics, if we are using squats and deadlifts to improve the amount of power and force that we can generate within our body, that is going to reflect itself as being improved performance. And the time that you spend in the gym can be some of the most productive towards your race result. If somebody is training for 12 hours a week and they have 45 minutes and they go, oh, do I either do a strength session or do yet another run? A lot of athletes go, oh, I'll do the run, that's what I need help with. But realistically, the strength training, 9 times out of 10, is going to be the better option for the athlete. And the favourite comeback I get from athletes who don't really want to strength train is they go, oh yes, but this athlete that I follow on Instagram or YouTube or this professional athlete, they don't do any strength training. Okay, well, they may not do any strength training, but how old are they? Chances are they're probably in their 20s or 30s. Again, not saying that for certain, but definitely a lot of professional athletes, a lot of high performing athletes are going to be around that age. And most of them will have been training most, if not all, of their lives in some form of sport. They may have only discovered triathlon a bit later in life, but chances are they're sort of playing team sports or some kind of other endurance activity. They've been moving their body for several years, for as long as they can remember. If you are in your 50s and you spend 15 hours a day sat down at a desk, you are in a very different position to that person. And the chances are that athlete who doesn't do any strength training, chances are they don't do it because they don't sort of understand it, they don't want to mess up their sort of what's obviously made them very successful. But chances are they may end up getting injured more than they would otherwise if they did include strength training in their program. Now, strength training doesn't prevent injuries. There's no way for anyone to be able to say with an ironclad promise you will not get injured. There's a lot we can do to reduce the amount of injuries that we get. And strength training, along with being sensible with our programming, is probably the best way to go about this. On to tip number 4. We're getting through them a bit faster now. Don't be a hero. Now, this is a trap that a lot of people fall into. Is that it can either be from an intensity standpoint, where they want to run, swim, bike as hard as they can all the time. They want to do loads of races. They want to do loads of group rides where they've got to be the first to the top of the hill. They're trying to impress people, whether it's those they're training with, people on Strava. They want all of their training to be super exciting. And I'm afraid that Ironman training just isn't super exciting. If you want to train well for Ironman, then you can't afford to have a very haphazard approach. I'm doing this one day, then I'm doing that, and I'm moving from here, moving to that. You know, oh, I found this Strava challenge, I'm going to do that. Oh, I'll do a Zwift race, I've got some extra time. You can't afford to have that approach. A lot of your training does need to be somewhat repetitive. Again, I do what I can to try and keep things as sort of as mixed, as varied as I can for an athlete without losing what it really takes for them to get the results that they want, but without losing interest in the sport and getting bored and just feeling like they're stuck in a loop. But it also refers to volume as well. And this is probably the bigger issue for most Ironman athletes as opposed to intensity. A lot of athletes will start out their Ironman training and they may go from not doing a huge amount of exercise, they may be doing a bit, to suddenly go into Ironman training mode, especially if they're the kind of person who wants to sign up and get it all done within 6 months. They'll have this huge jump in volume. And they may go from sort of 3 hours a week of exercise up to 10 or 12. And, I mean, yeah, you can probably do that for week, 2 weeks, maybe up to 4 weeks when you have your first rest week. But then starting again from week 5 into week 6 into week 7, it starts to really add up. And if you are looking at a 6-month Ironman sort of project, you've got 26 weeks. That's quite a long time for you to be able to maintain that level of intensity for. Okay, there will hopefully be some easy weeks and there'll be a taper in there. But if you go out like the absolute clappers, trying to impress people, putting in these big long sessions, putting in double days immediately, that is a pretty good way for you to burn yourself out and find yourself in a worse position than you started. However, if there was one symptom of somebody being a hero and getting themselves into real trouble with Ironman training, it is a pre-Ironman marathon. Now, I understand the logic, okay? I want all of my athletes to be able to swim the distance of an Ironman before they toe that start line. I don't think that's asking too much. And on the bike, I want them all to be able to ride at least 100 miles. The extra 20 kilometres, I'm not that worried about. But hitting 100 miles on a bike, it's a nice milestone. There are lots of events, at least in the UK, where you can head out and you can hit these big rides. Go somewhere a bit interesting. They've got aid stations. It's a bit of fun, it's a bit different. However, with running, there's really not an awful lot of benefit to doing a marathon before an Ironman. And in fact, you know what? I think it's just generally a really bad idea, unless you are a very accomplished marathon runner and you just feel like sort of slipping a little warm-up race in. The reason for this is that marathon training can be harder than Ironman training in some respects. I know that's a bit of a dirty thing to say on a triathlon podcast, but as someone who's trained for both, when you're training for Ironman, you have that variety, you have that stimulus, you have all of that going. When you're training for a marathon, you're running at least 4, probably 5 or 6 days a week. And it's just hard on the body. It's hard mentally getting out, putting all of these long miles in without really a huge amount of rest. Your legs are always that bit tired. It's quite a draining experience. And if you want to go out and you want to go sub 4, sub 3, if you have this big marathon goal in your mind, then it's going to take an awful lot of hard work for you to achieve that, all of time of which you are neglecting your bike and your swim. And all of those long runs that you're doing, they are going to be affecting your ability to get in those long rides, your ability to get in those high quality sessions in the week that follows. It just doesn't make sense for you to dedicate that much time to your running if at the end of the day we are training for Ironman. Now, the biggest mistake that people make when they think about improving their run is, oh well, I want to do more running. I want to get a marathon done before my Ironman. The best thing you can do for your run is to have a really efficient bike ride. To be bike fit enough that you can get off the bike in whatever time it is you complete, put your running shoes on and start running the marathon without legs that are absolutely cooked. Okay? You could be someone around the 2-hour mark for the marathon, but if you come off the bike and your legs are absolutely wrecked, your stomach is doing backflips, you're really not feeling very well, and you find yourself shaking as you reach to put on your running shoes, guess what? You're going to have a horrible marathon and you're going to walk a lot of it. So the actual fitness benefits, the time benefits, the sort of the recovery that comes with doing this pre-race, this sort of pre-Ironman marathon, it just doesn't add up for me. It's just not worth it. And guys, I'm going to give you a home truth here, and you're not going to want to hear this. But if you're training for your first Ironman, I am 90% certain you're going to end up walking good stretches of it. I know it's not what you want to hear, but it's what happens. It is very difficult to be able to string together your first Ironman without walking for, decent amounts of the marathon. It may be that you are running 5 kilometers, walking 1 kilometer. It may be that you're walking all of the aid stations. But you're probably going to end up walking a good stretch of the marathon. And if you go into the race expecting to be able to come within sort of 20 minutes of what you think you could achieve for a straight marathon, you're going to come away disappointed. But all of this, it does go beyond training for a marathon pre-Ironman. It is also putting in unnecessarily big training days given where you are in the training cycle. So if we have somebody using that sort of example of an athlete who's preparing for an Ironman 6 months out, if they decide to go out and they do a 4-hour ride followed by a 19-minute brick run, that is a huge day of training for them to do. And okay, once you are getting really close to the race, it's the kind of session you might want to do once or twice. I'm not a fan of really long brick runs. Your running biomechanics are quite significantly altered when you're running off of a long bike. The chance for injury does increase when you do long brick runs. But if you are putting in these massive sessions each week, you do run the risk of just digging yourself a hole of long-term fatigue. And if you do go into a state of what we call non-functional overreaching, which some people refer to as overtraining, I'm not going to split hairs on this one, but if you do find yourself in a state where you are so tired all the time, when you've still got 2 or 3 months out from the race, it's really quite hard to dig yourself out of that hole. And you actually be in a worse place than sort of before you started, as it were, because it is very difficult to climb out of that pit of fatigue and exhaustion. So do listen to your body. Do be sensible. If you're following a training plan, or if you've enlisted the help of a coach, feed back to them or change the plan. Be brave enough to go, look, this is not sustainable, this isn't working, I can't keep this up. Edit things, change things. But I would much rather somebody goes into a race 10% undercooked, who has missed sessions, than somebody who's 1% overcooked. Somebody who is in a real depth of overtraining, fatigue, just this miasma that follows them around, and they just don't want to be there on race day, and they just go through the motions and they get a very average result, and they go away disappointed. Going too hard, too long, too soon is a real recipe for disaster, and it can be very hard to make this mental switch from doing shorter distances, where that kind of approach, that going in really hard for a short period of time, can work and it can pay dividends, to actually standing back and going, right, I really need to look at this as being a huge, maybe even multi-year project. You do need to have a very different mindset change and just go, look, I need to be thinking, what decisions can I make now that is going to help me just achieve my goals further down the line, wherever that may be. Okay, tip number 5 is enlist the help of a coach. Now, it doesn't have to be me. I know I am recording this podcast, and part of it is promote my services as a coach, but I know I'm not for everyone. Some people wouldn't want to work with an online coach anyway, but find someone who can act even as a kind of a mentor figure. It could be another experienced athlete. It could be a club coach. A sort of working with an online triathlon coach who can create your program, who can check in with you, can help you with all facets of your training, I think is the best way to go about it. I mean, there's a reason that I've built a business around this. But I know it's not a model that works for everyone. However, it is so very difficult to have success in Ironman if you are doing everything yourself. And it can be very trendy. I mean, there are a lot of other podcasts, shall we say, that are have a listenership that are primarily young men, and there is a sort of a big message around self-sufficiency, being sort of this lone figure, and sort of spending a lot of time on self-improvement at home. And some people see Ironman as being a vehicle for that. And yes, Ironman can be a vehicle for self-improvement. But if you're taking on an enormous project like an Ironman, you cannot look at your own training objectively, okay? I don't care who you are, you're not built different, mate, okay? You cannot reflect critically on your own training, on your own practice, on your mistakes, without somebody else to at least bounce ideas off of. And this can take so many forms. It can be somebody who you sort of know from a local cycle group who can help you understand the mechanical aspect of bikes. In fact, one of my top 5 tips was going to be to understand how to fix your bike. I do believe it is that important. It could be that you go to sort of some sessions where there's either a club session, or you hire a coach on a one-to-one basis with somebody that looks at your swim technique, or you hire someone to help you with your nutrition. Okay, there is only so much you can achieve on your own, and very few people out there have any success in Ironman without a real support network around them. Now, that support network could be a dedicated coach, it could be a supportive partner, it could be training mates, it could be a triathlon club. Okay, there are lots of different forms that this could take. But if you think that you can achieve your athletic potential just on your own, I'm sorry, but that is completely the wrong way to look at things. And some people really struggle with the idea of getting any kind of coaching because it means that they're losing control to a greater or lesser extent. They have it in their head that they know what it is that they need to do. But you know what? 99.9% of the time, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. It is very difficult for you to critically analyse your weaknesses and make the decisions required to go about these. Now, if you are someone who isn't taking the Ironman especially seriously, you just want to tick the box, okay? Yeah, there are plenty of books and training plans out there, low cost options that you can get that can help you sort of achieve your goals of Ironman if you're not that serious about it. However, if you want to do yourself justice, if you want to get around the 12, 11, 10 hour mark, okay, it is going to be extremely difficult, and you're going to go through a humiliating experience if you try to do everything yourself, okay? Be brave, reach out to a coach, get some help in whichever area it is that you're struggling with. So there we have it. My top 5 tips for your first Ironman. Now, there is so much of the sport of Ironman, it is very difficult to really sort of whittle it down to just 5. There is so much going on that I just encourage you to really be a student of the sport. Keep learning, keep doing research, keep finding what it is that works for you. There's always going to be an element of trial and error with Ironman. But really, don't try and think it's something you can just muscle through, okay? So it could end up being a very expensive, very embarrassing day out for you if you do. Okay, I try not to make this an advert for myself, but if you are interested in working with me towards your first Ironman, it's not too late. I may even be able to help you with something specific, such as strength and conditioning or nutrition. Either way, my email is in the show notes. Drop me an email, let's have a conversation. Otherwise, wishing you all the best for the rest of the week, and stay safe, enjoy your training.